The phone vibrated against the marble countertop at exactly 3:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. I remember the precise time because I'd been watching the kitchen clock for the past hour, trying to decide whether pouring myself a second glass of Chardonnay before 5 o'clock made me pathetic or just practical. It was March 15th, what should have been Marcus's 35th birthday. Instead, it marked 5 years since I'd buried my only child in the family plot at Riverside Cemetery, next to the grandparents he'd never met. Rosa had forgotten her phone when she rushed out 20 minutes earlier, apologizing profusely about her daughter Sophia's parent-teacher conference that she absolutely couldn't miss. I'd waved her off with a tired smile, assuring her it was fine. Go, family comes first. The irony of those words would hit me like a freight train approximately 90 seconds later. I almost ignored the phone entirely. Rosa's personal life was her business, and I prided myself on being the kind of employer who respected boundaries. God knows I'd had enough of my privacy invaded during the divorce proceedings with Robert, when lawyers had dissected every aspect of our 32-year marriage like pathologists examining a corpse. But the phone kept buzzing, insistent, and something made me glance at the screen. My son's face smiled back at me. Not a photo I recognized from my own collection. And believe me, I knew every picture of Marcus ever taken. This was from his last Christmas, 2019, at Robert's company party. Navy blue cashmere sweater that I'd given him for his birthday. That particular smile he wore when he was being polite at social events, but would rather be anywhere else. His dark hair slightly too long because he'd been too busy with work to get it cut. The photo I'd looked at on Facebook exactly twice before deleting my account, because seeing him alive and happy was more than I could bear. My hand reached for the phone before my brain caught up with my actions. The movement felt automatic, like my body was operating on some frequency separate from conscious thought. The screen showed a notification preview. Payment confirmed, $8,500 transferred. Final photos attached. Well done, mi amor. The sender's name was listed as G.H. My vision tunneled. The kitchen, this beautiful updated kitchen with its professional-grade appliances and custom cabinetry that Robert and I had renovated the year before Marcus died. This room where I'd taught my son to make his grandmother's chocolate chip cookies when he was 7 years old, seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the counter's edge with my free hand, my knuckles going white. Rosa had my dead son's photo as her phone wallpaper. Rosa, who'd started working for me in February 2020, a full 3 years after the accident. Rosa, who'd never met Marcus, who'd never even heard me speak his name aloud because the grief counselor had said I needed to create new spaces without triggering associations. Rosa, who came recommended by the agency with impeccable references and a gentle, unobtrusive manner that I desperately needed when the Connecticut house felt like a mausoleum, and I couldn't bear to be alone with my memories. My thumb moved across the screen. I knew Rosa's passcode. She'd given it to me 6 months ago when she'd asked me to check a recipe on her phone while her hands were covered in chicken marinade. 22468. Simple, easy to remember. The kind of password you use when you're not hiding anything, or when you are, but you don't expect anyone to look. The messaging app opened, the photos loaded, and everything I thought I knew about my son's death, about the past 5 years of my life, about the woman I'd trusted and welcomed into my home and paid generously and treated like family. All of it shattered into pieces so sharp I could feel them cutting into my lungs with every breath. The first image was security camera footage. Grainy. Timestamp in the corner, 11:47 p.m., March 15th, 2020. Highway scene, rain-slicked asphalt, gleaming under streetlights. I recognized the stretch of I-95 immediately, the section between exits 82 and 83, where the road curves sharply near the abandoned rest stop, where Marcus had died. The police had told me there was no security footage. That section isn't covered, Mrs. Chen, Detective Morrison had explained, his voice heavy with sympathy that felt genuine at the time. The nearest traffic cameras are 2 miles in either direction. I'm sorry. We have to work with what the physical evidence shows us. But here it was, camera angle from above and to the left. Marcus's silver Audi clearly visible. And behind it, gaining speed, a dark sedan with its headlights off. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chairs where Rosa and I had shared coffee countless mornings, where she'd listened patiently while I rambled about my book club selections or complained about Robert's latest attempts to reduce my alimony payments. The same table where she'd helped me address Christmas cards and laughed at my stories about Marcus's childhood and seemed so genuinely kind that I'd given her a $2,000 bonus last December. The second photo showed a different angle. Same timestamp, 10 seconds later. The sedan had pulled alongside Marcus's car. I could see Marcus's profile through his driver's side window, could imagine him checking his mirrors, maybe feeling that first flutter of concern. My baby boy, alone on a rainy highway, with no idea that the next 60 seconds would be his last. I had to force myself to look at the third image, the sedan swerving into Marcus's lane, Marcus's car jerking right, the guardrail approaching, and then I couldn't look anymore. I closed my eyes, but the images burned behind my eyelids like photographs developed in a darkroom. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Someone had forced my son off the road deliberately, methodically, and then disappeared into the night while I spent the next 5 years believing that Marcus had simply lost control during a storm. But why did Rosa have this footage? How did Rosa have this footage? I scrolled down, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. Below the photos was a text thread stretching back months. I scrolled to the beginning, to last November, 9 months after Rosa had started working for me. Status report? From GH. Widow remains unaware, maintains daily routine. No contact with anyone from Marcus Chen's professional circle. Seems to have accepted accident narrative completely. Excellent. Continue monitoring. Report any changes immediately. My stomach lurched. I pressed my hand against my mouth, tasting bile. Monitoring. Rosa had been monitoring me, reporting on me, to someone whose initials were GH. I scrolled further, my horror compounding with each exchange. Months of reports, details about my activities, my emotional state, my social interactions, or lack thereof. Widow had lunch with friend Patricia on Tuesday. Conversation focused on book club selection and Patricia's new grandson. No discussion of son or accident. Widow sorting through boxes in basement, became emotional and stopped after 20 minutes, took sleeping pill at 9 p.m. They'd been watching me. For years they'd been watching me through Rosa, making sure I stayed in my grief fog, making sure I never asked the wrong questions or looked too closely at the circumstances of Marcus's death. The most recent messages were from yesterday. Payment ready to transfer. Final confirmation needed regarding vehicle disposal. Confirmed. Brother-in-law handled as discussed. Vehicle dismantled and scattered across 3 salvage yards in Guatemala. No trace possible. Perfect. Final payment $8,500 as agreed. You've done well, Rosa. After 5 years, I think we can finally close this chapter. Thank you, mi amor. Sophia's school tuition is due next month. This money is answer to prayers. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the tile floor. I stared at it lying there, screen still glowing with evidence of a conspiracy so monstrous that my brain couldn't quite process it. Rosa, gentle, efficient, seemingly grateful Rosa, had been part of murdering my son, had been paid to infiltrate my life, to watch me, to report on my every move, to ensure I never healed enough to start asking dangerous questions. And whoever GH was, they'd orchestrated all of it. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 2 minutes. Could have been 20. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows at a different angle when I finally moved, reaching down to pick up the phone with hands that no longer felt like my own. I opened the Photos app, scrolling back through months of images. Rosa's daughter Sophia at various school events, Rosa's sister's birthday party, normal life documentation. And then, buried in a folder marked Work, dozens of photos of me. Me leaving the house for my morning walk. Me at the grocery store. Me having lunch with Patricia at the Garden Cafe. Me at the cemetery on Marcus's birthday last year, kneeling at his grave with flowers. Someone, Rosa presumably, had been documenting my life like I was a subject under surveillance, which I realized with a cold clarity that felt almost like calm. I had been. For 3 years, I'd been a project, a loose end that needed managing. The grieving mother who might eventually become a problem if she ever started to think too clearly about the night her son died. I heard a car door slam outside. Rosa, returning from Sophia's conference. I had maybe 90 seconds before she walked through the kitchen door, before she saw her phone sitting on the counter where she'd left it, before she saw my face and realized that everything had changed. In that moment, I made a choice. I didn't pick up my own phone to call the police. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I carefully placed Rosa's phone back exactly where it had been, screen dark, innocuous. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the window. Margaret Chen, 62 years old, gray hair that I'd finally stopped dyeing last year, lines around my eyes that had deepened dramatically after Marcus died. I looked like what I was, a widow who'd lost everything. But appearances, I was learning, could be deceiving. Rosa's key turned in the lock. I heard her footsteps in the mudroom, heard her hanging up her coat. I picked up my wine glass with a steady hand and turned as she entered the kitchen, her face apologetic. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry I'm late. Sophia's teacher wanted to discuss her science project and—" She stopped, her eyes going to her phone on the counter, then back to my face. "Is everything okay?" I smiled. It felt strange on my face, like muscles remembering a forgotten exercise. "Everything's fine, Rosa. How's Sophia doing in school?" She relaxed, moving to retrieve her phone, slipping it into her pocket without checking it. "Very well, thank you. Her teacher says she's top of the class in math." "Wonderful," I said. "You must be so proud." "I am," Rosa said, her voice warm with genuine maternal affection, the same warmth she'd always shown when discussing her daughter. The same warmth that had made me think she was a good person, a kind person, someone worthy of the trust and generosity I'd extended. "Rosa," I said slowly, setting down my wine glass, "I've been thinking. Why don't you take the rest of the week off? Paid, of course. Spend some extra time with Sophia. You work so hard, and I can manage on my own for a few days." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Mrs. Chen, that's very generous, but there's no need—" "I insist," I said firmly. "Consider it a thank you for everything you do. You've been wonderful these past 3 years. I don't tell you that often enough." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Calculation? I couldn't tell anymore. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That means a lot to me." "You're welcome," I said. And then, because I needed to know if I could still perform, still lie as smoothly as she had been lying to me, "You know, you remind me of my son sometimes. The way you care about Sophia, the way you work so hard to give her opportunities. Marcus was like that, always thinking of others, always trying to do the right thing." I watched her face carefully. She smiled, sad and sympathetic. "He sounds like he was a wonderful person." "He was," I agreed. "He really was, and someone took him from me." The smile froze slightly on her face. "The accident?" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "The accident. Such a terrible, random tragedy." I let the words hang in the air between us, weighted with meaning that she couldn't quite interpret. "Anyway, go on. Enjoy your time off. I'll see you Monday." She gathered her things, thanked me again, and left. I watched through the window as she got into her 10-year-old Toyota and drove away. Only when her car disappeared down the tree-lined street did I allow myself to move. I walked to my home office, the converted sunroom that overlooked the garden where Marcus had played as a child, and opened my laptop. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in 5 years. I had work to do, research to conduct, pieces to put together. Because whoever GH was, whoever had paid Rosa to watch me, whoever had orchestrated my son's murder and then infiltrated my life to make sure I never discovered the truth, they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated what a mother's love could survive, and more importantly, what it could become when it transformed from grief into something else entirely. Something colder, something patient, something absolutely unstoppable. I pulled up my contact list and found a name I hadn't called in 2 years. David Park, Marcus's best friend from Princeton who'd become a private investigator in Manhattan. He'd stayed in touch after the funeral, had offered multiple times to look into the accident if I ever wanted him to. I'd always said no, too broken to face the possibility of answers, too comfortable in my fog of grief and sleeping pills and empty days. Not anymore. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Margaret, is everything okay?" "David," I said, my voice clear and calm and utterly certain. "I need your help. I need to know everything about the night Marcus died. And I need to know who GH is. Can you do that for me? There was a pause, and then, what happened? Something that should have happened 3 years ago, I said. I woke up. David arrived at my house the next morning at 7:30, carrying 2 large coffees from the Starbucks on Main Street and a leather messenger bag that I knew contained recording equipment, cameras, and whatever other investigative tools he thought we might need. He looked older than I remembered, lines around his eyes, some gray threading through his black hair. But then again, I suppose we'd all aged in the 5 years since we'd stood together at Marcus's funeral, watching them lower my beautiful boy into the ground. "Show me everything," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. That was David, direct, efficient, the same qualities that had made him Marcus's closest friend since freshman year at Princeton. They'd been roommates for 3 years, had stood up at each other's college graduation, had talked nearly every week, even after David moved to New York, and Marcus stayed in Connecticut to be near me and Robert. I handed him Rosa's phone. I'd gone back into her message history the night before, after she'd left, using my own phone to photograph every single conversation, every image, every piece of evidence. I'd worked until 3 in the morning, methodical and focused in a way I hadn't been since before Marcus died. It felt good to have a purpose again. It felt good to be angry instead of just sad. David scrolled through the messages in silence, his jaw tightening with each screen. When he got to the security footage of the accident, he had to set the phone down and walk to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Jesus Christ, Margaret. They murdered him. They actually murdered him. I know, I said quietly. And then they put someone in my house to make sure I never figured it out. He turned back to me, his expression fierce. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. When did you hire Rosa? I poured us both fresh coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat frozen in shock 20 hours earlier. February 2020, about 9 months after Marcus died. I was a mess, David. You remember, I couldn't function. Robert had left me the previous August. Apparently grief wasn't attractive enough for him to stick around, and the divorce was finalized in January. I got this house, a substantial settlement, my trust fund that my parents left me. Robert kept the pharmaceutical company, obviously, and moved to Boston with his secretary because apparently he's a walking cliché. David nodded, pulling out a notebook. He'd always been a paper and pen person, even in college. And the house was too much for you to maintain alone? The house was killing me, I corrected. Every room had memories of Marcus. His bedroom upstairs still had his high school trophies and his college textbooks. The basement had boxes of his things from his apartment that I couldn't bring myself to sort through. The garden had the tree swing Robert built when Marcus was 5. I needed help. But more than that, I needed another human presence, someone to break the silence. I'd hired Rosa through Premier Home Services, an agency that specialized in placing domestic workers with wealthy families in Fairfield County. They'd sent me 3 candidates. I'd chosen Rosa because she'd seemed the least intrusive. She was 41 at the time, had immigrated from Guatemala 8 years earlier, had a teenage daughter, spoke functional English, and came with references from 2 previous employers who'd moved out of state. One had been an elderly couple relocating to Florida, the other a family that had transferred to California for work. Did you contact those references? David asked. The agency said they'd already verified them, I admitted, feeling foolish now. I trusted the agency's vetting process. They charge enough for their services, $850 placement fee plus first month's commission. I assumed they were thorough. David made a note. I'll need the agency's information and the names of those references. I'm guessing they're going to be fake, but we need to confirm. Rosa had started immediately. She came 5 days a week, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., handling cleaning, laundry, occasional meal preparation, and general household management. I paid her $4,200 monthly, which was on the higher end for the area, but I'd never been the type to nickel and dime people who worked for me. My parents had raised me to treat service workers with respect and compensate them fairly. Another irony that tasted like ash in my mouth now. She was perfect, I continued, hearing the bitterness in my own voice. Quiet, efficient, never pried. When I had bad days, and I had a lot of bad days that first year, she'd just leave me alone, clean around me, make sure there was food in the refrigerator. On better days, we'd chat while she worked. Nothing deep. Weather, local news, her daughter's school activities. She seemed grateful for the job, grateful for the wages, grateful that I helped when Sophia needed school supplies or when Rosa's car needed repairs. David was writing quickly, his expression grim. You helped with her car repairs? Twice. Once about 6 months after she started. Transmission issue, $1,800. And again last year, something with the brakes, $9 or $50. I didn't think anything of it. She was a single mother working hard to support her kid. That's admirable. I wanted to help. You have a kind heart, David said quietly. They used that against you. The words hit harder than I expected. I had to swallow against the sudden tightness in my throat. I gave her Christmas bonuses, $2,000 last December, $1,500 the year before. When Sophia needed a new laptop for school, I bought it. When Rosa mentioned wanting to take Sophia to Disney World someday, I gave her an extra $500 and told her to start a vacation fund. Margaret, I thought I was being generous, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I thought I was helping someone who deserved help, and the whole time she was reporting back to whoever ordered my son's murder. She was making sure I stayed broken and compliant, and too grief-stricken to ask questions. David reached across the table and gripped my hand. This isn't your fault. You were kind to someone who didn't deserve it. That's on her, not you. But it felt like my fault. It felt like I'd betrayed Marcus by being too stupid, too naive, too wrapped up in my own pain to see what was happening right in front of me. I'd welcomed his killer's accomplice into our home, paid her, trusted her, treated her like family. What kind of mother did that? Tell me about Marcus's work, David said, changing direction. The weeks before he died, what was he working on? I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to focus. He had his own consulting firm, Chen Medical Device Consulting. He worked with small inventors and startup companies, helping them navigate the regulatory process for medical devices, connecting them with manufacturers, protecting their intellectual property. He'd been doing it for about 3 years at that point, since he left his corporate job at Meditech Solutions. Why did he leave Meditech? He said he was tired of corporate politics. He wanted more autonomy, wanted to work directly with inventors who were actually trying to innovate rather than just maximize profit margins. Robert thought he was being naive. They'd argued about it at Christmas 2019, about a month before Marcus died. David's pen stopped moving. Argued about what specifically? I closed my eyes, trying to remember. That Christmas had been tense. Robert had been distant, stressed about something at work. Marcus had been unusually quiet, spending a lot of time on his laptop even during family time. Robert said something about Marcus needing to be more realistic about how the medical device industry actually works. That innovation was nice in theory, but that profit and patent protection were what mattered. Marcus got angry, which was rare for him. You know how even-tempered he was, and said that maybe some people still cared about actually helping patients instead of exploiting them. Did he elaborate on that? The exploitation part? No. Robert shut down the conversation, said it wasn't the time or place. They didn't really speak the rest of the evening. Marcus left early, said he had work to catch up on. That was the last Christmas we had together. My voice broke on the last words. David waited, patient, while I composed myself. This was why I'd pushed all these memories away for 5 years. Remembering hurt too much. But now the pain had a purpose. Now it was fuel. The week before he died, I continued, Marcus called me 3 times, which was unusual. He was usually so busy we'd text more than talk. He sounded stressed. He mentioned having an important meeting coming up, something that could be really significant for one of his clients. He wouldn't give me details, said it was confidential, but I could hear in his voice that he was excited and nervous at the same time. David leaned forward. Did he mention names? The client? Or who the meeting was with? No. Just that it involved a potential patent dispute with a major company. He said he'd tell me all about it after the meeting, that it might be big news. The meeting was scheduled for March 23, 2020. I felt my throat tighten. He died on March 15th, 8 days before that meeting. That's not a coincidence, David said flatly. Someone didn't want him making it to that meeting. Who would have known about it? I don't know. His clients, obviously. Whoever he was supposed to meet with. Maybe colleagues, other consultants in his network. I paused, another memory surfacing. Emma, his girlfriend. She might know something. Emma Thornton. They'd been dating for 2 years, were talking about getting engaged. She'd been devastated by Marcus's death, had barely made it through the funeral. She'd tried to stay in touch with me afterward, but it had been too painful for both of us. Every conversation just reminded us both of what we'd lost. She'd moved to Oregon about a year after Marcus died, trying to start fresh somewhere with no memories. Last I'd heard from Patricia, she'd gotten married to someone she met out there. I hoped she was happy. She deserved happiness. I'll contact her, David said. If Marcus was excited about this case, he probably told her at least something about it. And we need to identify GH. Do those initials mean anything to you? I'd been thinking about that all night. Not immediately, but I have Marcus's laptop. I never went through it after he died. Couldn't bring myself to. But it's in the basement with the rest of his things. If he was working on something sensitive, there might be files, emails, something that points to who wanted him dead. We need that laptop, David said immediately. Today. Right now. So we went down to the basement, to the corner where I'd stacked boxes of Marcus's belongings 3 years ago and hadn't touched them since. His college textbooks, his business files, his personal items from his apartment. And yes, his laptop, still in its case, the battery long dead. David handled it like it was made of glass, like it might contain the answers to questions I'd been too afraid to ask. I'm going to take this back to my office, he said. I have a tech specialist who can recover everything, even if files were deleted. But Margaret, I need you to understand something. Whatever we find, it's going to change everything. Your whole understanding of Marcus's death, possibly your understanding of people you know. Are you ready for that? I looked at the box of my son's things, at the Princeton sweatshirt he'd worn constantly, at the photo frame containing a picture of the two of us from his college graduation, both smiling, both so happy, both unaware that we had less than 3 years left together. David, someone murdered my child and then put a spy in my house to make sure I never found out. I'm ready for whatever comes next. He nodded slowly. Then we start investigating, but carefully. If Rosa's reporting to someone, if they've been monitoring you for 3 years, we can't let them know you're onto them. You have to act completely normal. Can you do that? I thought about the smile I'd given Rosa yesterday, the casual conversation, the paid time off. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. Because if these people killed Marcus to protect whatever secret he discovered, they won't hesitate to kill again if they think you're a threat. The words should have frightened me. Instead, they crystallized something that had been forming since the moment I'd seen my son's photo on Rosa's phone. I wasn't the broken widow anymore. I wasn't the grief-stricken mother who needed protecting. I was something different now, something they should have been afraid of all along. Let them try, I said quietly. I have nothing left to lose. David called me 48 hours later at 11 p.m. on Saturday night. I was in bed, pretending to read, but actually staring at the same page of my book for the past 20 minutes, my mind running through endless scenarios of what he might have found. Rosa wasn't due back until Monday, and the house felt different without her presence, less like a home and more like a crime scene I was investigating from the inside. I need you to sit down for this, David said, without preamble. I'm already in bed. Even better. I heard him take a breath. Margaret, Marcus wasn't just working on a patent dispute. He'd uncovered systematic fraud at a major pharmaceutical company. They were stealing medical device innovations from small inventors, filing patents under shell companies, and then burying the original inventors in litigation until they ran out of money to fight. We're talking about dozens of cases over the past decade, hundreds of millions in stolen intellectual property. My mouth went dry. Which company? There was a long pause. Too long. PharmaCorp Industries. The room tilted. PharmaCorp Industries. Robert's company. The company he'd built from a small pharmaceutical distributor into a medical device and drug manufacturing empire worth $3.2 billion. The company that had paid for our house, for Marcus's education, for the lifestyle we'd enjoyed for 30 years. The company Robert had fought to keep in the divorce, offering me a generous settlement to avoid any claim to the business itself. No, I whispered. Robert wouldn't. He couldn't. I have the files, Margaret. Marcus had been building a case for 6 months. One of his clients, a biomedical engineer named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had invented a revolutionary cardiac monitoring device. She'd shown her prototype to PharmaCorp in good faith, hoping for a partnership. 3 months later, PharmaCorp filed patents for an almost identical device under the name of a subsidiary company. When Dr. Mitchell confronted them, they claimed independent development and threatened her with a lawsuit for defamation if she pursued it. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my own heart hammering. And Marcus was going to expose them? He'd connected Dr. Mitchell with 4 other inventors who had similar experiences with PharmaCorp. He'd documented the pattern, gathered evidence of the shell companies, traced the patent filings. He had emails, internal documents. Someone inside PharmaCorp was feeding him information. He was planning to take everything to the SEC and the FDA. The meeting on March 23rd wasn't with a potential client. It was with a federal prosecutor. The implications crashed over me like a wave. If Marcus had exposed PharmaCorp's fraud, the company would have faced criminal charges, massive fines, possibly dissolution. Everything Robert had built, everything our family's wealth was based on, would have been destroyed. And Marcus, my son, who I'd thought was just helping small inventors navigate regulatory processes, had been threatening to detonate a bomb under his father's entire empire. Did Robert know? I asked, my voice barely audible. Did Marcus tell him what he'd discovered? I think so. I found an email Marcus sent to Robert on March 10th, 5 days before he died. Subject line: "We need to talk about PharmaCorp, urgent." Robert replied within an hour. "Not over email. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., come alone." March 11th. 4 days before Marcus died. "David, I need you to find out if there's any record of that meeting. Security camera footage from PharmaCorp's offices, sign-in logs, anything. Already on it. But Margaret, there's more. The initials GH? I think I know who that is. Gerald Hendricks. He's been VP of Operations at PharmaCorp for 8 years. He would have been directly involved in the patent filing process, would have known about the fraud, would have been in a position to coordinate a cover-up. Gerald Hendricks. I'd met him at company events over the years, countless Christmas parties and corporate retreats. Mid-50s, ambitious, always positioning himself as Robert's right-hand man. He'd sent a sympathy card after Marcus died, a generic Hallmark card with a printed signature. I'd thrown it away without a second thought. "So Robert and Hendricks knew what Marcus had discovered," I said slowly, working through it. "They knew he was going to the federal prosecutor, and 8 days before that meeting, Marcus conveniently died in what looked like a single-vehicle accident during a rainstorm." "It gets worse," David said grimly. "The dark sedan in the security footage? I've been running the partial plate number through databases. It was a rental from Enterprise, leased on March 14th, the day before Marcus died, to a man named Roberto Jimenez, Rosa's brother-in-law. The connection hit me like a physical blow. Rosa's family ran Marcus off the road. And then Rosa was placed in your house 9 months later to make sure you never got suspicious, never started asking questions, never looked too closely at the official accident report. Margaret, this wasn't just murder. This was a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple people across multiple states, possibly multiple countries. These are serious criminals with serious resources." I threw back the covers and got out of bed, too agitated to lie still. "Where is Roberto Jimenez now?" "That's the thing. He supposedly died in Guatemala in 2021. Officially, anyway. I'm working on confirming whether that death certificate is legitimate or just another layer of the cover-up. If they paid him to kill Marcus, they might have wanted to eliminate him as a loose end." I paced my bedroom, my mind racing. 5 years. For 5 years I'd believed my son died in an accident. I'd mourned him, grieved him, nearly drowned in the loss of him. And the entire time, the people responsible had been right there. Robert in Boston with his new wife, Hendricks running PharmaCorp's operations, Rosa in my kitchen reporting my every move. They'd watched me suffer and done nothing. Worse, they'd orchestrated my suffering, used my grief as a tool to keep me manageable. "What about the person feeding Marcus information?" I asked. "The inside source at PharmaCorp. Did you find any names?" Marcus was careful about protecting his source. The emails are redacted, referred to only as "friend inside." But Margaret, Think about who would have had access to that level of documentation. Patent filings, internal communications, evidence of the shell companies. That's senior management level access. You think there might be someone at PharmaCorp who's willing to help us? Maybe. Or someone who was willing to help Marcus but went silent after he died. Either way, we need to find them. They might have information we don't have access to, and they might be willing to testify if we can guarantee their protection. I stopped pacing, an idea forming. David, what if I contacted Robert directly? What if I told him I was going through Marcus's things, found some confusing business files, wanted his help understanding them? He'd have to respond, and his response might tell us how worried he is, whether he knows we're onto him. Absolutely not, David said immediately. Margaret, these people killed your son. If they think you're a threat, you could be next. We need to be smart about this, build an airtight case before we make any moves. I've been smart for 5 years, I said, hearing the edge in my voice. I've been quiet and grieving and completely harmless. And you know what that got me? A spy in my house and my son's murderers walking free. I'm done being careful. Margaret, I'm not going to do anything stupid, I interrupted. But I need to do something. I can't just sit here knowing what I know and pretend everything's normal. Rosa comes back Monday. I have to look her in the eye and smile and act like I don't know she helped murder my child. I need to feel like I'm taking action, like I'm moving forward. David was quiet for a long moment. Okay, but we do this my way, controlled and documented. I'm going to set you up with recording equipment. Your phone, your house, everywhere you might have a conversation we need captured. And you don't meet with anyone alone. If Robert or Hendricks want to talk, it happens in a public place with me nearby. Agreed? Agreed. I'm also going to contact Emma tomorrow. If Marcus told her anything about the PharmaCorp case, even in passing, it could be useful. And I'm hiring a forensic accountant to trace the money. Rosa's been receiving regular payments. We need to know where that money's coming from, whether it connects directly to Robert or Hendricks or goes through intermediaries. We talked for another 30 minutes, planning our next steps, discussing strategy. When I finally hung up, it was past midnight. I should have been exhausted, but I felt electric, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. Yes, I was furious. Yes, I was heartbroken all over again, learning that Marcus's death was even more senseless and cruel than I'd thought. But I also had purpose now, direction, a target for all the grief and rage I'd been swallowing for half a decade. I spent Sunday installing the recording equipment David had dropped off at dawn, hiding tiny cameras in my home office, setting up my phone to automatically record any conversations I flagged. I felt like a spy in my own house, which was fitting since Rosa had been spying on me for 3 years. 2 could play that game. Monday morning, Rosa arrived at 8 a.m. as usual, cheerful and refreshed from her long weekend. Mrs. Chen, thank you again for the time off. Sophia and I had such a nice few days together. We went to the movies, did some shopping. It was wonderful. I'm so glad, I said, and my smile felt almost natural on my face. You deserved it. You work so hard. She moved through the house, starting her usual routine. I watched her differently now, seeing the small things I'd missed before. The way she positioned herself to have clear sightlines to whatever room I was in. The way she always seemed to be nearby when I was on the phone. The way she'd occasionally take photos of the house, which I'd assumed was just her documenting her work, but now I wondered what she was really photographing. Around 10 a.m., my phone rang. Robert's name on the caller ID. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Our only communication was through lawyers regarding alimony payments. Rosa was in the hallway, close enough to potentially overhear. Perfect. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Robert, Margaret, I hope I'm not disturbing you. His voice sounded strained, uncertain, not like the confident executive I'd been married to for 30 years. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I know this week has been difficult. It took me a moment to remember. This was the week of Marcus's birthday. Robert was calling to perform the yearly ritual of acknowledging our dead son, the bare minimum of decency from a father who'd abandoned his family when grief got uncomfortable. I'm managing, I said carefully. Actually, I've been going through some of Marcus's things lately. His business files, his laptop. I think I'm finally ready to sort through everything properly. The pause on the other end was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. That's good, Margaret. Healthy, moving forward. Some of it is confusing, though. He had files about patent disputes, medical device companies. I thought maybe you might be able to help me understand some of the business terminology. You know I was never good with that side of things. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. Marcus's consulting work was pretty specialized. Maybe you should contact someone from his industry? Oh, I just thought since PharmaCorp works with medical devices too, you might have insights. He had quite a lot of material about your company, actually. Old emails, documents. I assume it was just research or something? Margaret. His voice had changed, gone colder. I really don't think it's appropriate for you to be going through confidential business materials. Marcus's work involved proprietary information. You should probably just box everything up and either donate it or destroy it. Destroy it? I let surprise color my voice. But some of it might be important. He had communications with several inventors, people who might want their documents back. It seems wrong to just throw it all away. Those inventors have moved on, I'm sure. It's been 5 years. The appropriate thing to do is dispose of the materials properly. He was definitely rattled now, his carefully controlled tone slipping. In fact, if you want, I can send someone from PharmaCorp's legal team to help you sort through everything. Make sure nothing sensitive gets inadvertently distributed. Translation. Let me send someone to remove any evidence before you figure out what you're looking at. That's very thoughtful, I said, but I think I can manage. I'll probably just pack it all up and put it in storage. No need to bother your legal team. Margaret, I really think... Robert, I need to go. I have an appointment. Thank you for checking in. I hung up before he could press further. I sat very still, phone in hand, thinking about what had just happened. I'd given Robert the slightest hint that I might be looking at Marcus's files, and he'd immediately tried to control the situation, offered to send people to my house, suggested destroying everything. He knew. He absolutely knew what Marcus had discovered, and he was terrified I might find it too. Rosa appeared in the doorway, dustcloth in hand. Everything okay, Mrs. Chen? You sounded upset. Just Robert being Robert, I said with a tired wave. He called about Marcus's birthday, then started lecturing me about properly disposing of old business files, as if I need his input on what to do in my own house. She nodded sympathetically. Men always think they know best. The casual misogyny of the comment, the easy female solidarity, would have made me smile a week ago. Now it just made me sick. Rosa was performing, playing the role of sympathetic ally, while reporting every word of this conversation back to the people who'd killed my son. Actually, Rosa, could you do me a favor? There are boxes in the basement, Marcus's things that I've been meaning to sort through. Could you help me bring them up to my office? I think I'm finally ready to deal with them. Something flickered across her face. Of course, Mrs. Chen. Right away? Whenever you have time today. No rush. She nodded and disappeared. I heard her footsteps descending the basement stairs. I knew what she was doing, texting Hendricks, warning him that I was accessing Marcus's files. Good. Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. My phone buzzed. David. Just spoke with Emma. She remembers Marcus being stressed in the weeks before he died. He told her he'd discovered something ethically complicated about his father's company, something that was going to force him to make a difficult choice. She begged him to drop it, to let someone else handle it, but he said it was too important. She's willing to testify to that conversation if needed. Another piece of the puzzle. Marcus had known the investigation would hurt his father, had struggled with that knowledge, but had chosen to move forward anyway because it was the right thing to do. And that choice had cost him his life. I texted back, Robert just called. Very interested in helping me dispose of Marcus's files. Suggested sending PharmaCorp legal team to my house. David's response was immediate. Do not let anyone from PharmaCorp into your house. I'm coming over tonight with someone I trust, a lawyer who specializes in whistleblower cases. We need to secure those files immediately and figure out our next move. Rosa came back upstairs, carrying 2 boxes, slightly out of breath. I can bring up more if you need, Mrs. Chen. That's plenty for now, thank you. She set the boxes in my office, and I saw her eyes scanning the contents, the laptop case, the file folders, the flash drives. She was memorizing, cataloging, preparing her report. I wondered what Hendricks would do when he learned I had everything. when he realized the evidence of their crimes had been sitting in my basement for 5 years, waiting to be discovered. That afternoon, Rosa left at 4 p.m. as usual. I watched her drive away, waited 15 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back, then called David. "They're going to move against me," I said without preamble. "Robert's scared. He's going to tell Hendricks I have the files. They're going to do something." "I know," David said. "That's why I'm coming tonight with backup. We're going to secure everything, make copies, get the originals into a safe deposit box they can't access. And Margaret? I think it's time we brought law enforcement into this." "Not yet," I said. "Not until we have absolutely everything documented. They've gotten away with this for 5 years. I won't risk them escaping on a technicality because we moved too fast. Then we need to move smart. I'm bringing my tech specialist too. He's going to sweep your house for bugs, check if they've been monitoring you beyond just Rosa's reports. If they know you're investigating, they might have escalated their surveillance." The thought sent ice through my veins. They could have been listening to my conversations, watching me through cameras I didn't know existed. But then again, I'd lived under Rosa's observation for 3 years. What was a few more electronic eyes compared to having my son's killer in my kitchen? "Do it," I said. "Find everything. I want to know exactly how much they know." "Margaret," David's voice was gentle. "Are you okay? Really?" I looked around my office at the boxes of Marcus's things, at the evidence of his work and his courage and his determination to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. Once they pay for what they did to him, once everyone knows the truth, then I'll be okay. We'll get them," David promised. "All of them." After we hung up, I opened the first box and pulled out Marcus's laptop. The battery was dead, but David's specialist would recover everything. I held it in my hands, this machine that contained the last thoughts and work of my murdered son, and I made him a promise. "I see it now," I whispered. "I see what they did to you, and I'm going to make sure everyone else sees it too. I'm going to finish what you started. I swear it." The laptop screen was dark, but I could see my reflection in it. A 62-year-old woman with gray hair and tired eyes and 5 years of grief carved into the lines of her face. But also something else now. Something harder. Something dangerous. Something Robert and Gerald Hendricks should have made sure stayed buried along with my son. David arrived at 7 p.m. with 2 other people. A woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Catherine Walsh, whistleblower attorney, and a younger man named Chris who carried enough technical equipment to stock a small electronics store. They worked quickly and quietly, Chris sweeping my house room by room, while Catherine and David examined Marcus's files with the methodical precision of people who understood exactly what they were looking at. Chris found the first bug within 20 minutes, hidden inside the smoke detector in my bedroom. The second was in my home office, embedded in the base of my desk lamp. The third in the kitchen, tucked behind the decorative molding above the cabinets. He pulled each one out with gloved hands, placing them in static bags, like tiny pieces of evidence, which I suppose they were. "These are sophisticated," he said quietly, showing David the devices. "Voice-activated, encrypted transmission, probably installed within the last year. Someone with serious resources put these here." "Rosa had access to every room," I said, my voice flat. "She could have installed them any time." "Or someone else did when you weren't home," Chris countered. "These required drilling, wire concealment. This was a professional job, not something you do in 5 minutes while your employer is in the next room." The implications settled over me like ice water. They'd broken into my house. While I was out at the grocery store, or my book club, or the cemetery visiting Marcus's grave, someone had come into my home and planted surveillance equipment. The violation felt almost physical, like discovering fingerprints on my skin. "How long have they been active?" David asked. Chris checked his equipment. "This model came on the market about 14 months ago. So maximum operation time is 1.5 years, but I'd need to analyze the internal logs to know exactly when they were activated. 14 months. I thought back, trying to remember what I might have said in my own house over the past year. Phone calls with Patricia about book club, conversations with my financial advisor about my investment portfolio, calls with my lawyer about the final alimony settlement, everything. They'd heard everything. "Mrs. Chen," Catherine said, pulling my attention back to the table where she'd spread out Marcus's files. I need you to understand something. What your son uncovered, this is massive. We're not talking about a single patent theft or isolated fraud. This is systematic criminal enterprise spanning a decade, involving dozens of victims, hundreds of millions in stolen intellectual property. PharmaCorp didn't just steal Dr. Mitchell's cardiac monitor design. They've been running an entire operation built on theft. She showed me documents Marcus had compiled, charts showing patterns, names of inventors who'd approached PharmaCorp in good faith, only to see their innovations patented by shell companies with addresses in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Financial records Marcus had somehow obtained showing money flowing from PharmaCorp through layers of corporate entities designed to obscure the trail. Your son was building a RICO case, Catherine continued. Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. He wasn't just documenting patent theft. He was proving that PharmaCorp operated as a criminal enterprise. If he'd made it to that meeting with the federal prosecutor, your ex-husband and everyone in PharmaCorp's senior leadership would be facing decades in federal prison. So they killed him, I said. Not a question. A statement of fact. Yes, Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. And then they placed Rosa in your home to monitor you, installed surveillance equipment to make sure you never got curious, and maintained that surveillance for years. Mrs. Chen, you need to understand how dangerous these people are. They've already committed murder. They've already demonstrated they'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves, which is why we need to move fast, David interjected. Get everything secured, make multiple copies, get originals into safety deposit boxes they can't access. Then we go to the FBI with everything at once. Marcus's files, the surveillance equipment, Rosa's phone records, testimony from Emma, and the inventors Marcus was helping. We bury them in evidence before they know what's happening. I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing ahead, connecting pieces. The phone call today. Robert suggesting he send people from PharmaCorp's legal team to help me sort through Marcus's files. He was going to send them to steal the evidence. Or destroy it, Catherine said. Or both. The fact that you refused might have already triggered a response. They know you have the files. They know you're looking at them. They're going to assume the worst and act accordingly. Then we use that, I said, an idea crystallizing. We let them think I'm confused, out of my depth, grieving mother who doesn't understand what she's looking at. I call Robert back tomorrow, tell him I was hasty, that actually I would appreciate help from his legal team. They send someone, and when they arrive, you're here waiting with law enforcement. David shook his head immediately. Too dangerous. If they're desperate enough, they won't hurt me in my own house with witnesses around, I interrupted. And we'll have everything on camera, everything recorded. We'll catch them in the act of trying to destroy evidence, trying to obstruct justice. That's another charge, another piece of the puzzle. She's right, Catherine said slowly. If we set it up properly, control the environment completely, it could work. And it gives us leverage. They're not just connected to a murder 5 years ago. They're actively committing crimes right now, today. That makes prosecution easier. We argued about it for another 30 minutes. David insisting it was too risky, me insisting we needed to be aggressive. Finally, Catherine brokered a compromise. We'd secure all the evidence first. Tomorrow, everything would be copied and secured. Then Wednesday, I'd make the call to Robert, set the trap. David would have law enforcement standing by, and Chris would wire the entire house with cameras and recording equipment. But if anything feels wrong, David said, gripping my shoulders and making me look directly at him, if they send more than one person, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you abort immediately. You understand me? Marcus would never forgive me if I let something happen to you. His voice cracked slightly on my son's name. I'd forgotten, in my own grief, that David had lost Marcus too, that they'd been like brothers for 15 years, that David's determination to help me wasn't just professional obligation, it was personal. I understand, I said. I'm not trying to be reckless. I just need to do this right. For Marcus. We worked until past midnight, photographing every document, uploading everything to encrypted cloud storage, organizing files into categories that would make sense to prosecutors. Catherine drafted a preliminary brief outlining the case, the evidence, the potential charges. Chris finished sweeping the house, no more bugs, but he found evidence that someone had tampered with my exterior security system 6 months ago, creating blind spots in the coverage. When they finally left, promising to return tomorrow to continue preparations, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Rosa had worked for 3 years, the same kitchen where I'd discovered the truth on her forgotten phone, and I felt something shift inside me. For 5 years, I'd been a victim. The grieving widow, the broken mother, the woman who'd lost everything. They'd counted on that grief to keep me weak, to keep me manageable, to keep me from asking dangerous questions. But they'd miscalculated. Grief hadn't made me weak. It had just been waiting, dormant for the right moment to transform into something else entirely, into rage, into determination, into the absolute certainty that I would see justice done, no matter what it cost me. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts to Robert's number. My finger hovered over the call button. Not yet. Tomorrow, after everything was secured. Tomorrow I'd make the call that would set everything in motion. Tomorrow I'd invite my son's murderers directly into my home and watch them walk into the trap I'd spent 5 years unknowingly preparing. I looked at the framed photo of Marcus on the counter, the one from his Princeton graduation. 22 years old, whole life ahead of him, proud smile on his face as he held his diploma. He'd always been braver than me. Even at the end, knowing what exposing PharmaCorp's crimes would cost him personally, knowing it would destroy his father's company and probably his parents' marriage, he'd chosen to move forward anyway because it was right. "I'm learning from you," I told his photograph. "Better late than never, right?" The house was quiet around me, empty of bugs now, but full of ghosts. Marcus's ghost, the ghost of who I used to be, the ghost of the life I'd thought I had before I learned it was all built on lies and blood money. Tomorrow, those ghosts would get their reckoning. Tomorrow, I'd stop being the victim and become something they should have feared all along. A mother, with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. I called Robert at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, my voice carefully calibrated to sound uncertain and overwhelmed. David sat across from me at the kitchen table, recording equipment running, giving me encouraging nods as I spoke. "Robert, I'm sorry about the other day. I was defensive when I shouldn't have been. You were right. I'm in over my head with Marcus's files. There's so much technical terminology, legal documents I don't understand. If you're still willing to send someone from your legal team to help me sort through everything, I'd appreciate it." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Of course, Margaret. I understand this must be overwhelming. I'll send Gerald Hendricks himself. He knew Marcus's work better than anyone. He can come this afternoon if that works for you." Gerald Hendricks, the man whose initials had been all over Rosa's phone, the man who'd paid to have my son murdered, coming directly to my house within hours of my request. They were desperate, and desperation made people careless. "This afternoon would be perfect," I said. "Around 2 p.m.? 2 p.m. it is. Margaret, thank you for trusting me with this. I know things have been difficult between us, but Marcus was my son too. I want to make sure his legacy is handled properly." The audacity of those words, "Marcus was my son too," coming from the man who'd ordered his murder, made my hand tighten around the phone until my knuckles went white. David reached across the table and squeezed my other hand, grounding me. "I'll see you at 2, I said, and hung up before my voice could betray the fury burning in my chest. "He's not coming himself," I told David. "He's sending Hendricks." "Even better," David said. "Hendricks is the operational guy, the one who actually coordinated everything. He's more likely to slip up, say something incriminating. And we've got FBI agent Morrison arriving at 1:30 to position in the garage. We'll have local police on standby 2 blocks away. The entire house is wired. Chris spent 6 hours yesterday making sure we'll capture everything. Catherine arrived at noon with 2 associates and enough legal documentation to fill a briefcase. We'd spent yesterday securing everything. Marcus's laptop was with a forensic specialist, copies of all files were in 3 separate safety deposit boxes, and the originals were in FBI custody as of this morning. Whatever happened this afternoon, the evidence was safe. "Remember," Catherine coached me, "you're confused but cooperative. You found these files, you don't understand them. You want help making sense of your son's work. Let Hendricks take the lead. Let him think he's controlling the situation. And the moment he tries to take anything, the moment he suggests destroying evidence or implies you should forget what you've seen, we have him on obstruction charges at minimum." Rosa had called that morning, asking if I needed her today. I'd told her to take the day off, a small mercy perhaps, or maybe I just couldn't bear to have her in the house for what was coming. She'd sounded relieved, and I wondered if Hendricks had told her to stay away, to maintain deniability for whatever was about to happen. Agent Morrison arrived precisely at 1:30, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an air of competent authority. She'd been the one to tell me 5 years ago that Marcus's death was an accident, that there was no security footage, that sometimes tragedies just happened. Now she stood in my kitchen listening to David explain everything we'd uncovered, and I watched her professional composure crack as she understood how thoroughly she'd been deceived. "Mrs. Chen, I am so deeply sorry," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "We investigated thoroughly, at least we thought we had. The accident scene was consistent with a driver losing control in wet conditions. There were no witnesses, no indication of another vehicle. The rental car that Jimenez used was returned clean 2 days later in New Jersey. They knew exactly how to make it look like an accident." "I know," I said. "That's why they got away with it for 5 years, but not anymore." Morrison positioned herself in the garage with a clear view of the kitchen through the interior door. David and Catherine stayed in my home office with the associates, monitoring through the camera feeds Chris had set up. I was alone in the kitchen when the doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Gerald Hendricks stood on my doorstep looking every inch the corporate executive. Expensive suit, leather portfolio, concerned expression that would have seemed genuine if I didn't know what he really was. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with gray hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses and Caribbean vacations, the kind of tan you could afford when you were being paid to cover up murder. "Margaret, thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, stepping inside when I opened the door. "I know this must be difficult, going through Marcus's things after all this time." "It is," I said, playing my part, "but I think I'm finally ready. Can I get you some coffee?" "That would be lovely." I poured coffee with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, very aware of the cameras capturing every angle, the microphones picking up every word. Hendricks sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Rosa had sat for 3 years, and arranged his face into an expression of sympathy. "Robert mentioned you'd found some of Marcus's business files," he said carefully. "I know his consulting work could get quite technical. I'd be happy to help clarify anything that seems confusing." "That's very kind," I said, sitting across from him. "I have to admit, some of what I found was disturbing. Marcus had files about patent disputes, about companies stealing from inventors. I didn't realize that was such a problem in the medical device industry." Something flickered in Hendricks's eyes. Marcus was passionate about protecting inventors, sometimes perhaps overly passionate. He could see conspiracies where there were just normal business practices. "Normal business practices," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you'd call it, when a company steals someone's design and patents it under a shell corporation?" His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I found very detailed files about PharmaCorp, Gerald. About inventors who came to the company in good faith and then saw their innovations stolen. About shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. About systematic fraud spanning a decade." I kept my voice level, conversational, like I was discussing the weather. "Marcus documented everything. Names, dates, financial transactions. It's quite comprehensive." Hendricks set down his cup very carefully. "Margaret, I think you may be misinterpreting what you're reading. Patent law is complicated. Sometimes there are disputes about who developed what first, but that doesn't mean—" "He was going to the federal prosecutor," I interrupted. "Did you know that? He had a meeting scheduled for March 23, 2020. He was going to expose everything, and then, 8 days before that meeting, he died in what looked like an accident. Quite a coincidence." The mask slipped, just for a second, but I saw it. The calculation in his eyes, the assessment of how much I knew and how much danger I represented. "Margaret, grief can make us see patterns that aren't there. Marcus's death was a tragedy, but it was an accident. You need to accept that and move on." "Move on," I said softly. "The way you moved on? The way you paid Rosa Jimenez's brother-in-law to run my son off the road and then planted Rosa in my house to make sure I never figured it out?" He went very still. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're making serious accusations without any evidence. You're grief-stricken, you're confused. I have Rose's phone records, I said, pulling out my own phone and showing him the screenshots I'd saved. Every message between you and her, every payment you made, every report she filed about my activities. I know about the security footage you had of the accident. I know about Roberto Jimenez and the rental car. I know everything, Gerald. He stared at the phone screen, and I watched him realize that this wasn't a confused widow he could manipulate. This was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. His hand moved toward his pocket, and I tensed, but he just pulled out his own phone. I need to make a call, he said, his voice hard now, the pretense of sympathy completely gone. Go ahead, I said. Call Robert. Tell him I know. Tell him everything is about to come out. Tell him that Marcus's evidence is already with the FBI, and there's nothing either of you can do to stop it. His face drained of color. The FBI? Agent Morrison is actually in my garage right now, I said pleasantly. She's been listening to this entire conversation, so have several lawyers and a federal prosecutor. You're being recorded from 6 different angles, and everything you've said in the last 10 minutes is admissible evidence of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and about a dozen other charges. Hendricks stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're dealing with. PharmaCorp has resources you can't imagine, lawyers who will bury you in litigation. Like you buried the inventors Marcus was trying to help? I stood too, facing him across the table. Like you tried to bury the truth about what you did to my son? I'm not afraid of your lawyers, Gerald. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. You took the only thing I had left to lose when you killed Marcus. The garage door opened, and Agent Morrison walked in, badge clearly visible, gun holstered, but present. Gerald Hendricks, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. You have the right to remain silent. I watched her read him his rights, watched David and Catherine emerge from my office with the recording equipment, watched Hendricks's expensive suit and corporate confidence crumble as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He looked at me with something between hatred and disbelief. Robert will never let this go forward, he said, as Morrison guided him toward the door. He'll fight this with everything he has. Let him try, I said. Marcus fought for what was right, even though it cost him everything. I can do the same. They took Hendricks away. Through my front window, I watched the unmarked FBI car pull away from my curb, watched my neighbors starting to peek through their curtains, wondering what was happening at the Chen house. Tomorrow, everyone would know. Tomorrow, the news would break about PharmaCorp's fraud, about Marcus's murder, about the conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for 5 years. My phone rang. Robert's name on the screen. I answered on speaker, David and Catherine and Agent Morrison all listening. Margaret, what the hell have you done? His voice was panicked, all pretense gone. Hendricks just called me from an FBI car. You went to the federal prosecutor? You gave them Marcus's files? I gave them everything, I said calmly. Every document Marcus compiled, every piece of evidence. Agent Morrison is here now, and she tells me there are currently federal agents executing search warrants at PharmaCorp's headquarters and your home in Boston. It's over, Robert. You've destroyed everything, he said, his voice breaking. 30 years of work, thousands of employees who will lose their jobs, shareholders who will lose everything. You destroyed everything when you ordered our son's murder, I interrupted, my voice sharp as glass. Don't you dare try to make me responsible for the consequences of your crimes. Marcus discovered what you were doing, and instead of stopping, instead of making it right, you had him killed. You murdered our child to protect your profits. I didn't. He stopped himself, but it was too late. You didn't what? I pressed. Didn't order it? Didn't know Hendricks was going to have Marcus run off the road? Which part are you claiming innocence on, Robert? Silence on the other end. Then, I want my lawyer. Good idea, I said. You're going to need several. The FBI is coming for you next. Agent Morrison has arrest warrants ready. You can turn yourself in, or they can pick you up. Your choice. Margaret, please. His voice cracked, and for a moment he sounded like the man I'd been married to for 3 decades, before I knew what he really was. Please, we can work something out. We can say it was all Hendricks, that I didn't know what he was planning. Are you seriously asking me to help you? Disbelief colored my voice. You killed Marcus. You put Rosa in my house to spy on me. You planted surveillance equipment in my bedroom. And now you want me to lie for you? He was my son too, Robert said desperately. I never wanted. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Hendricks said he would just talk to him, convince him to back off. Stop, Agent Morrison cut in, speaking clearly toward the phone. Mr. Chen, this conversation is being recorded. I strongly advise you to stop speaking and contact your attorney immediately. I heard Robert's breath catch as he realized what he'd just admitted. Then the line went dead. Morrison looked at me with something like respect. That was well done, Mrs. Chen. His statement just now, combined with Hendricks's panic and the evidence from Marcus's files, gives us more than enough for arrest and prosecution. Both of them are going to prison for a very long time. What about Rosa? I asked. And her brother-in-law. We have agents picking up Rosa right now. Roberto Jimenez, we've confirmed his death certificate from Guatemala was falsified. We're working with Interpol to locate him. He'll face murder charges, and Rosa will face conspiracy and accessory charges. Her cooperation could reduce her sentence, but she's looking at significant prison time either way. I nodded slowly, processing everything. It was done. 5 years of grief, 5 years of unknowing, 5 years of living with my son's killers, watching my every move. All of it was finally coming to an end. Justice was coming. Not the kind that would bring Marcus back, but the kind that would make sure everyone knew the truth, that would make sure his work exposing PharmaCorp's crimes hadn't been in vain. Mrs. Chen, Catherine said gently, you should prepare yourself. This is going to be a media sensation. PharmaCorp is a multi-billion-dollar company with thousands of employees and major political connections. The trial will be lengthy and very public. Robert's lawyers will try to discredit you, to make you look like a vengeful ex-wife with a grudge. It's going to get ugly. Let it, I said. I have the truth on my side. And I have Marcus's work, his evidence, his courage. That's more than enough. David pulled me into a hug, and I felt the tension I'd been carrying for days finally start to release. He'd be so proud of you, David said quietly. Marcus would be so damn proud. I closed my eyes against the tears that threatened. I hope so. God, I hope so. Through the window, I saw another FBI car arriving, more agents coming to process the house, to collect the surveillance equipment as evidence, to document everything for the case they were building. My quiet street in Connecticut, where I'd lived for 30 years, was about to become the center of a major federal investigation. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe fully, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my chest. Marcus's death hadn't been my fault. I hadn't failed him by not seeing the signs, by not preventing the accident. There had been no accident. There had been murder and conspiracy and crimes that no mother could have anticipated or prevented. And now there would be justice. Agent Morrison's phone buzzed. She checked it and looked up with grim satisfaction. Robert Chen just turned himself in to the Boston FBI field office. He's in custody. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where this had all begun when Rosa forgot her phone, where I'd served coffee to my son's murderer just an hour ago, where I'd spent 3 years unknowingly entertaining a spy. Tomorrow I'd probably have the whole house cleaned, maybe redecorated, maybe even consider selling it and starting fresh somewhere without all these poisoned memories. But today, I just sat and let myself feel the weight of what we'd accomplished. Marcus's killers were in custody. His evidence was safe. His work would continue. Catherine had already been contacted by 3 of the inventors Marcus had been helping, and they were ready to pursue their cases with PharmaCorp now that the criminal enterprise was exposed. My son hadn't died for nothing. His courage, his integrity, his determination to do what was right, even when it cost him everything, it had mattered. It still mattered. And now, everyone would know it. Thank you, I said to the room at large, to David, to Catherine, to Agent Morrison, to all the people who'd helped me find the truth. Thank you for believing me, for helping me do this. Thank you for not giving up, David replied, for being strong enough to see this through. Strong enough. I'd never felt strong during the past 5 years. I'd felt broken, destroyed, barely surviving each day. But maybe that was its own kind of strength. Maybe just continuing to exist, to get up each morning, to put one foot in front of the other while carrying the weight of grief. Maybe that had been preparing me for this moment, for the moment when I'd need to fight not just for myself, but for Marcus's memory, for justice, for truth. I looked at the photo of Marcus on the counter, my brilliant, principled, brave son. "We got them," I whispered. "We got them all." And though it was just a photograph, though he'd been gone for 5 years, I could almost hear his voice saying what he'd always said when I doubted myself. "I never doubted you for a second, Mom. Not for a second." The trial lasted 11 months. 11 months of testimony, evidence, media coverage that turned Marcus's death and PharmaCorp's crimes into a national conversation about corporate fraud and accountability. I sat in that courtroom every single day, watching Robert and Gerald Hendricks try to save themselves with expensive lawyers and careful testimony that crumbled under the weight of Marcus's meticulous documentation. Rosa pleaded guilty to conspiracy and accessory to murder in exchange for her testimony. She took the stand in month 6, her voice barely above a whisper as she described how Hendricks had approached her family in Guatemala, offering money and immigration assistance if she would take a job in my home and report on my activities. She'd known what they'd done to Marcus, had known from the beginning that she was monitoring the mother of the man her brother-in-law had killed. 8 years, the judge gave her. 8 years in federal prison, with deportation to follow. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her sentencing. I felt empty, watching this woman who'd seemed so kind, so hardworking, being led away in handcuffs. Her daughter Sophia was placed with a foster family, a good family, friends of mine from church who'd lost their own son years ago and understood complicated grief. I'd set up a trust fund for Sophia's education, college tuition fully covered, contingent on monthly video calls where I could see her growing up, see that she didn't inherit her mother's capacity for moral compromise. It wasn't forgiveness. I don't know if I'm capable of forgiving Rosa for what she did, for the betrayal, for the 3 years of lies. But Sophia was innocent. She was 14 years old, and her mother had made terrible choices that destroyed multiple lives, including her own. Marcus would have wanted me to help her. He'd always believed in second chances, in not punishing children for their parents' sins. Roberto Jimenez was extradited from El Salvador in month 8. He'd been living under a false identity, working construction, believing he'd gotten away with murder for hire. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The rental car records, the security footage, Rosa's testimony, financial records showing the $45,000 payment Hendricks had made through 3 shell corporations. Life sentence without possibility of parole. I watched them lead him away and felt nothing but cold certainty that Marcus's actual killer would die in prison. Gerald Hendricks received 22 years for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, racketeering, and a dozen other charges. He'd tried to make a deal, offering to testify against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the prosecution had enough evidence that they didn't need his cooperation. I watched him age 10 years over the course of the trial, his expensive suit and corporate confidence stripped away until he was just a man who'd chosen profit over human life and was finally facing the consequences. Robert got 15 years. His lawyers had argued that he hadn't ordered the murder directly, that Hendricks had acted independently, that Robert had only learned about it after the fact and had been manipulated into helping cover it up. The jury didn't buy it. The email Marcus sent, "We need to talk about PharmaCorp, urgent," combined with Robert's panicked response and the timeline of events made his involvement clear enough. He'd known Marcus was threatening his empire, and he'd known Hendricks would handle it. That was enough. I was there when they read the verdict. Robert looked across the courtroom at me, and I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the belated recognition of what he'd destroyed. Our son, our family, his own freedom. 30 years of marriage, reduced to this moment of him in an orange jumpsuit being sentenced for murdering the child we'd created together. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, not even hatred anymore. Just the cold fact of justice being served, of the truth being acknowledged in a public court of law. Marcus had been murdered. These men had ordered and executed his death. Now they would pay. It was mechanical, procedural, necessary, but it didn't bring my son back. PharmaCorp collapsed within 6 months of the arrests. The stock price plummeted, shareholders sued, the board of directors resigned en masse. Federal regulators seized control of the company's assets to compensate the inventors who'd been defrauded. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the biomedical engineer with the cardiac monitoring device, finally got her patent recognized and licensed her technology to an ethical manufacturer. She attended the trial several times, sitting beside me, and we became unlikely friends. Two women who'd had their lives destroyed by corporate greed but had survived to see justice done. I sold the Connecticut house. Too many ghosts, too many memories poisoned by the knowledge of what had happened there. Rosa's presence in every room, the surveillance equipment that had been hidden in my private spaces, the kitchen where I'd discovered the truth. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't wake up in that house without remembering everything I'd lost and everything I'd learned. I moved to Kennebunkport, Maine, a small coastal town Marcus and I had visited every summer when he was young. We'd rented the same cottage for 2 weeks every July, and Marcus had loved the rocky beaches, the lobster boats, the tide pools where we'd search for starfish and hermit crabs. I bought a small house 3 blocks from that beach, a blue cottage with white trim, and a garden where I could grow tomatoes and herbs. The Marcus Chen Foundation opened its doors 1 year after the trial ended. I used the settlement money from Robert's seized assets, $8.4 million after legal fees, to establish a nonprofit providing free legal support for inventors and small business owners facing corporate theft. Emma Thornton, Marcus's former girlfriend, left her marriage in Oregon. It hadn't worked, she said. She'd been trying to replace what she'd lost, and you can't replace people, and became the foundation's executive director. Working with Emma has been healing in ways I didn't expect. We talk about Marcus constantly, sharing memories, telling stories, keeping him alive between us. She tells me things about him I never knew, small details about their relationship, his dreams for the future, the way he'd wanted to propose to her on the beach in Kennebunkport that summer of 2020, the summer that never came. We've helped 17 inventors so far, 17 people who were facing the same theft and intimidation that Marcus had been fighting against. We've recovered stolen patents, secured settlements, connected inventors with ethical manufacturers. It's meaningful work, purposeful work. It's Marcus's work, continued. I wake up every morning now and walk the beach Marcus loved. I'm 67 years old, my hair completely white now, my face lined with years of grief and survival. The water is cold, even in summer. The rocks sharp beneath my feet, the salt air biting and clean. I walk for an hour every morning, thinking about my son, talking to him sometimes when no one else is around. I tell him about the foundation, about the inventors we're helping, about Emma, and how proud he'd be of the work she's doing. I tell him about Sophia, about her grades and her college plans, and how she wants to be a social worker helping immigrant families. I tell him that his courage mattered, that his evidence brought down a criminal enterprise, that his integrity cost him everything but saved countless others from the same fate. The grief hasn't disappeared. I don't think it ever will. There are still days when the weight of his absence crushes me, when I can't breathe past the knowledge that I'll never hear his voice again, never hug him, never see the man he would have become at 40, 50, 60. He'd be 40 now if he'd lived. He'd have been married, maybe with children of his own. I'd have been a grandmother. We'd have had decades more together. But the grief is clean now. It's not corrupted by lies and manipulation and unanswered questions. I know what happened to my son. I know why. I know who was responsible. And I've seen them face consequences. That doesn't make the loss easier, but it makes it bearable. It makes it something I can carry without being destroyed by it. I learned things about myself these past 6 years. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, more resilient than I believed possible. I learned that intuition matters, that maternal instinct isn't paranoia, that sometimes the questions we're afraid to ask are the ones we most need to answer. I learned that justice is slow and imperfect, but still worth fighting for. I learned that grief can transform, not disappear, but change into something else, something that honors the dead while allowing the living to continue. I learned that seemingly kind people can hide monstrous truths, that expensive suits and corporate credentials don't make someone ethical. that wealth built on theft and violence is worthless, that profit gained through cruelty costs more than any balance sheet can calculate, that a mother's love doesn't end with death. Sometimes it just transforms into something fiercer, something more dangerous, something absolutely unstoppable. Marcus wanted to make the world better. He wanted to protect inventors, to fight corporate fraud, to ensure that innovation served humanity rather than just profit margins. He died pursuing that goal, but his work didn't die with him. It lives on in the foundation that bears his name, in the inventors we help, in the precedent his case set for prosecuting corporate theft and violence. Yesterday, Dr. Mitchell called to tell me her cardiac monitoring device just received full FDA approval and will be manufactured for hospitals nationwide. Thousands of heart patients will benefit from her innovation. The innovation PharmaCorp tried to steal. The innovation Marcus died protecting. This is because of your son, she told me, her voice thick with emotion. This is Marcus's legacy, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what justice actually looks like. Not just prison sentences and ruined corporations, but the continuation of good work, the protection of innovation, the precedent that says some things matter more than profit. That integrity matters. That courage matters. That one person fighting for what's right, even when it costs them everything, can change the world. I stand on Marcus's beach this morning, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic, and I feel something I haven't felt in 6 years. Not happiness. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly happy again. But peace. The solid, certain knowledge that I did everything I could. That I found the truth, exposed the lies, saw justice served, and honored my son's memory in the only way that mattered, by finishing what he started. We got them, baby, I whisper to the wind, to the waves, to the ghost of my brilliant, principled, brave son. We got them all, and your work continues. It will always continue. The sun breaks over the horizon, painting the water gold and orange and pink. A new day. Another day without Marcus, but also another day of the foundation helping someone, of Emma carrying forward his mission, of justice served and truth acknowledged. I turn back toward my blue cottage, toward the life I've built from the ruins of everything I lost. It's not the life I wanted. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it's the life I have, and I've learned to honor it, to make it meaningful, to transform grief into purpose. They thought grief made me weak. They were wrong. Grief made me patient. And patient women, women with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge, women who love their children beyond death and beyond reason, we're the most dangerous kind. Marcus taught me that. In life, he taught me integrity. In death, he taught me strength. And that's a legacy worth living for.